Hi, guys. You're watching Out of the Box podcast, watching or listening Out of the Box podcast with Rosie Tran. I'm here today with a very special guest. He's a comedian and author of an amazing book called This is a Swedish Tiger, Aron Flam. Aron, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. And you?
I'm good. I'm really excited for you to share your story with the podcast listeners. It's definitely a very out of the box story. So you wrote this book. Tell us a little bit about it, talking about the Swedish history during World War II.
Oh, yeah. So I'm a Swedish Jewish comedian, and my grandparents came here, some during, some after the war, to Sweden, that is. And when well, we call it peak PC, but maybe you call it peak wokeness, happened here around 2014, 2015. As a comedian, a lot of my jokes concern cultural specific taboos. And Sweden has a pretty unique culture. It's a very progressive country. So it mostly has to do with social democracy. But I had been joking about these big social engineering programs that are basically government programs to make the populace walk in the same direction in lockstep with each other, basically. And it used to work quite well when Sweden was one of the most homogeneous cultures and ethnicities in the world. But those days are gone in Sweden, right? We're a multicultural country now. So I saw all these government programs that I've been joking about for years. They're starting to like converge on a point where everything seems to sort of crash. And I thought myself in a unique position to try and explain why. So I took a pause from stand-up and devoted my time to my podcast, Deconstructive Criticism, which is basically about critiquing deconstructivism, which is a big thing in Sweden. And and so I wrote this book, and this book is it's partly about what happened during the war, because in Sweden we have this myth of neutrality, because Sweden was supposedly neutral during the Second World War. We were, unlike all our neighbors, in all directions, not invaded or bombed to smithereens. So you have to ask yourself, how can a small country like that fend off Germany? And there are several explanations to that. But in Sweden, we don't talk about that. There's a culture of silence about what happened during the war. We have a lot of cultures of silence here, by the way.
Don't talk about anything. Don't mention it. Don't look at it. Don't smile at it. Put it under the rug, and it never happened.
Yes, and this is where the Swedish tiger comes into the story, because tiger is not an animal natural to the Swedish fauna, as you might imagine. I mean, it would be more appropriate possibly if Sweden had had an elk.
Okay.
Or a reindeer or something, you know, a bit more polar than a tiger. But the Swedish tiger, I can show you, this is actually an original tiger, a Swedish tiger. Can you see it?
Oh, yes. Oh my God, that's so funny. That's actually, I'm sure you don't know in Sweden, but that's actually the colors of the LSU Tiger. I'm from Louisiana, and that's the sports team.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and those are the actual colors, the purple and yellow, and the tiger is the mascot.
Okay, it looks purple for you. It's blue and yellow. It's the
okay.
It's the Swedish flag's colors.
Okay, so for those of you who are listening to the podcast and not watching, it's a little tiger icon that he just showed us, which has stripes on it that I thought looked like the LSU tiger, but apparently is blue and yellow, not purple and yellow.
Yeah, but it's not tiger stripes. It's very straight stripes that goes from top to bottom, and then just alternately yellow and blue, basically. And the thing is, the word tiger in Swedish has it's a double entendre.
And I see you also have the poster behind your head with the book cover.
Well, yes, actually, that's we can get to that a bit later, and I can explain the symbol. So it's a lithography behind me that Rosie is referring to you guys listening and not watching, obviously. But so this tiger is a military symbol from the Second World War. And it's because the word tiger in Swedish has a double meaning. It can mean both the animal tiger, but it can also mean to shut up.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
so a Swedish tiger means both, the animal, a Swedish tiger, and a Swede shuts up.
Okay. Don't talk about it. Let's just sweep this under the rug.
Yes, and they launched this campaign, the Swedish military and government, in 1941, in the midst of the Second World War,
So
to make
Swedes,
sure that
be quiet.
precisely, and it's interesting because a lot of countries, were directly involved in the war and had either active opposition to Hitler Germany or was collaborating, but Sweden was supposedly neutral. So I wrote about the Swedish neutrality because in reality, Sweden and Switzerland and countries like Spain, they got away from being invaded by either being fascist, but primarily by having something that Nazi Germany really needed.
Being fascist on the DL, as they would say in English.
Yes.
I don't know if you know that term.
On the down low.
Yes.
I think. Yes. Yes.
I love it with your accent. Yes, we're fascist on the DL.
Yeah. So I wrote about that, and then I wrote like a second part of the book was about collectivism and individualism, because another great Swedish lie is that we're one of the most individualist countries in the world, which is basically completely false. We are not the most collectivist country in the world either. We're just somewhere in the middle. But I would say more collectivist than individualist, definitely. And then and then there was a part about Sweden's actions during the Cold War, when we were also neutral between, the United States and the Soviet Union. And the myth in Sweden is that neutrality is a moral good. And I argued against that, and basically by saying, well, if you saw an ISIS soldier going to cut the throat of a Yazidi girl and you remain neutral, how can that be a morally good position?
What is the argument for it being a moral good? Because you're minding your own business or something?
Well, it's not really an argument. It's more of something you're supposed to think. No, I think the argument is something like, well, we could help people, but we didn't really help that many people. What we did was supply the German forces with ball bearings, which was it's like semiconductors today. A modern army can't really roll or fight without ball bearings. You need it for tanks and submarines and airplanes. So Sweden supplied Germany with ball bearings, and then in exchange got gold from Germany that it got from occupied countries, which is not a very charming history to have. So you understand why people who lived through it in Sweden might be a bit ashamed of it. But that's that story that they invented afterwards for their children, so as not to tell them where the huge fortune that Sweden suddenly amassed came from, has sort of spiraled into something else a few generations down the line.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So there's this kind of collectivist history in Sweden that's being funded by this dark past.
Yes, and I think it also gives rise to a certain amount of deep-seated regret or bad conscience, because during the migrant crisis of 2014-2015 here in Europe, when a lot of people came from the Middle East and especially Syria, Sweden and Germany took in the most refugees. It's like, they're protesting too much because they know there's something dark in the past that they have to overcompensate for.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think it has to do with that. So I wrote that book, and then I took the Swedish Tiger symbol as cover, but I changed it a bit. I made the tiger do a Hitler salute. and I made
I'm sorry to laugh at that, but that's very dark and hilarious.
Yeah, and I made it wink a bit and smile a bit more, and so on. And then it was a huge success. The book, it came out in 2 editions within the span of a month or so, and then when the 3rd edition came to Sweden from the printing press in the Baltics, the police stormed the premises and confiscated the entire edition, the
Oh,
entire 3rd
wow.
edition. So
Yeah,
that's
so the Swedish government, it was trying to silence your book.
that's my opinion. They
Yeah, when people storm in and confiscate the book, it sounds a bit intense.
Yes, because it was a ton and a half of books, so it's 1,500 kilos of books approximately.
And what was their argument for trying to silence your historical facts?
And it's historical facts, but it's also sort of a cultural analysis, a psychoanalysis of the Swedish culture. I'm a comedian after all, I'm not an historian. So I have my unique perspective on, what we comedians, because you're also one, might call the collective unconsciousness, or maybe even the collective consciousness. So I took the national symbol of the tiger as cover for the book, and so they charged me with copyright infringement.
Oh, okay.
Basically piracy. But I mean, it's not piracy. Piracy is when you maybe make, an exact copy of a designer handbag.
Let me ask you this, because in the United States, comedy and satire are protected. Is that protected in Sweden as well?
And here we come to sort of the center of the question. No, you have fair use. And we in Sweden we don't have fair use. So as a comedian and a satirist here, I've been laboring for years against what because we have, and this is literally what they call it, the so-called parody exception.
Okay.
It's not a law, it's a praxis, which means, I mean, you're supposed to consider praxis as well, but it means that whenever a satirist, for instance, working for state television, which is our biggest television channel, where I worked as a young man because I needed the money and also thought it would be fun, but it wasn't. Making comedy for the government is not fun.
That does not sound fun at all.
So I had problems because I noticed I was at least a fairly unbiased comedian. I just made jokes towards the left and the right. It was political satire that I wrote, like a Daily Show type show in Swedish. And I noticed that all my jokes against the right, they just flew past the censors, whilst every joke against the left became a passively aggressive questioning sort of thing until it just petered out and never really aired.
And so you felt like you were making fun of both sides?
Yes, absolutely. But I mean, you have to understand also that Sweden is one of the few, the Social Democrats have pretty much ruled this country 80% of the time for 100 years.
I actually think that's really sad as far as being a social democrat, because part of any argument or any point of view or opinion is how well does it hold up under satire, under argument, under, you want to have a strong point of view that can be attacked on all sides and still stand up, right? So you would think that they would want and welcome satire and parody and kind of like poking holes in the argument, right?
Well, I think partly it's what you Americans, you have this proverb, I think, that power corrupts and total power corrupts totally or something. No?
I don't think that's an American. I think that's like Socrates or something.
Okay. Anywho, if you have,
I'm probably getting it wrong, but I think that's like a Greek philosopher. I should Google it. Okay, I'm wrong, but I know it. Yes, I understand.
But if you have that much power for that long of a time, unbridled, anyone would become corrupt. And since it's a social democracy, it becomes corrupt in alignment with the ideology of the Swedish social democracy, which is quite special. This is the world's, I think, oldest social democracy. So it's more of a people's republic. So they prosecuted me for a few years. For
police, piracy.
Yes, precisely.
Okay.
So first I was investigated by the Unit Against International and Organized Crime for a year and a half.
For a book
And then
cover. Let's be very clear for the listeners and watchers that this is from a book cover.
Yes,
Is their
absolutely.
argument. Okay. But
Yes.
really what seems is happening is that your book analyzing and possibly criticizing and bringing light to this Nazi fascist association with the country was not boding well with the government.
I think so, because what I was trying to say earlier about the so-called parody exception is that it could, whenever it suited them, they would say, well, it doesn't hold up to copyright because copyright is a law, right? And the parody exception is only a praxis. So they could always say, yeah, of course we have a parody exception, but it wouldn't really be a parody exception because they could always say, no, it doesn't apply here or whatever.
No,
So
maybe you should have put a Hitler, is it a Hitler mustache?
No, I don't think
Hitler salute. Hitler salute. Okay, Hitler salute, and then maybe you should have put a clown nose on the tiger
to make it even more obviously satire. Yes. You mean? Well, I thought it was quite obvious.
And he's making a Hitler salute, and he has a clown nose, so clearly it's a parody.
One would think. The prosecution's argument was during the trial that the prosecutor couldn't understand how the cover could be a parody if the contents of the book were serious. Okay,
so this is why making comedy for the government is a bad idea, because they didn't have a sense of humor.
Exactly. They don't. Actually, he in the courtroom he read a lot of my old tweets.
Oh, wow!
Yeah, because he wanted to paint me as a dangerous or deranged person. And I mean, if you read jokes without,
without timing, I can just imagine this like super serious guy in the courtroom reading punchlines with bad comedic timing and just straight faced.
Yeah. I can attest that this prosecutor was very high up on the gliding scale of autism spectrum. Something.
You're like, no, you're ruining my punchline. There's a pause there, and when I say Hitler, that's when you boom, and he wasn't getting my material. What a unique situation.
Well, I don't know if this joke will translate, but he read one of my one-liners, which is basically, and I'll explain it briefly afterwards, the best thing you can do for the climate is to not have children, especially if you're Malena Ernman. And Malena Ernman is very famous in Sweden in her own right. She's an opera singer and a musical artist, but she's also the mother of Greta Thunberg.
Okay.
And he read that with a straight face. So yeah.
Actually, yeah, you do sound, if that tweet without context sounds really mean and nasty, actually.
Well, thank you. I try to be.
If you're just saying it very straight faced, but if you're saying it with a sarcastic tone, that's a different joke. That's a joke.
Exactly, or at least that's my point. And after a few years of being tried, I won, and it wasn't a unanimous sort of what do you call it?
Verdict.
Verdict, exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Rosie. And so one of the judges wanted to keep the parody exceptions, but the majority vote wanted to take in the EU parody exception, which is actually kind of a good fair use clause. So thanks to me, we now have both in Sweden.
Oh, amazing.
Which means we have two types of protection for satire, which is good news for me, because I think that will make my colleagues here a bit braver in the future when it comes to manufacturing jokes and sketches. And when it comes to the lithography, is a bit different than the cover of the book, because the cover of the book was under prosecution, and the books were confiscated, and I had promised a lot of people books, and also they wanted millions in fines from me, the government.
Oh, horrible.
So I had to make millions. I'm a comedian, but I'm mid-level successful in a very small country, which means I can get by, but I'm not rich by any means.
You can't pay millions of dollars in Swedish fines against
No.
you.
So I made a lithography, another parody of the tiger, where he wears a concentration camp suit and holds up the fist of BLM. And that they didn't dare confiscate that. Because that would have looked extremely bad. But it was also kind of strange because, as I said, I was, previous to this trial or prosecution, I was semi-famous or pretty famous. I have a big post on Wikipedia, both in Swedish and English, one if you want to read it. And one of the complaints against me was that I was in the Nordic resistance movement. And that's a neo-Nazi organization.
First of all, is that true? Yes or no?
No,
okay.
I don't think they accept self.
They don't accept Jews.
Liberal Jews. I don't think they do that. I mean,
so the neo-Nazi group does not accept satirical Jewish comedians. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm not saying that a Jew couldn't be a Nazi, because I think anyone can grow up to be anything they want to be. I'm just saying you're not going to be accepted in every neo-Nazi circle of your Jewish heritage.
You're like, as a Jew, I identify as a Nazi.
you could, absolutely. I do not. But no.
That was a joke. That was a joke on identification.
Yes,
anyone
I understand.
Okay, but, for the listeners. It was a woke joke.
Oh, I see. How woke is it over there now?
So it depends on what part of the country you're in. So I actually feel like the term woke has been confiscated the way the word liberal has been confiscated. Because I don't know if you know the history of the word liberal, but there's liberal, and then neoliberal meant something else, and then liberal meant something else. So it can be really confusing. So I think being woke in the traditional sense of the word is a very good thing, which should mean to be aware and socially aware. And so I think that word has been confiscated, and now it's turning into something else, which I don't like.
I write a bit about that in my book, actually. It's interesting because in America, I know liberal is a curse word that the right uses against the left. And I'm from a country where liberal is a curse word that socialists use against the right.
It's very confusing. So I think that we all need to decide what things mean, because I think that certain words have been confiscated and reorganized into a very confusing thing. But I would consider myself aware, which is the original definition of woke. And I think woke now has turned into a bad word, and some people mean it to be certain things, and some people mean it to be other things. And it's very ironic, because the woke culture that I don't like are people that are claiming that they're very aware of the needs of minorities or women or other things, but they're doing it in a very controlling way and in a very authoritarian way. And so that's very ironic, because that's the opposite of giving people rights. You want everyone to have rights and equality. And what I see a lot of, I'm going to put quotations, woke people doing is they're claiming that they want to help minorities or women or the poor, but their techniques are very authoritarian and oppressive, which is the opposite. So I think the best way to give minorities and women and the poor rights is to spread freedom and democracy and free ideas, and not through authoritarianism. So that's my opinion. So I'm making up a word right now, but I would consider myself classically woke.
Classically woke.
Totally made up term, just made up by me right now on the podcast. But yeah, so there's different meanings. I don't like the authoritarianism. I don't like the idea that you're taking rights from anyone or that someone should be punished for someone else's crimes of the past. I don't like that. I don't think history should be erased. I think awareness needs to be made. So I don't know where I fit in the political spectrum. I do have views on both sides, and I do think that both sides have ridiculous, silly, certain silly issues that they champion for that are kind of I think a distraction from the real political issues that can create change and positive things for the world.
I'm only an outside observer of your culture, but your culture is pervasive.
American culture is
I
pervasive.
think I watch. I think on average, I think I watch more American culture or consume more American culture than I do actually Swedish culture. And my impression is that well, any political movement has to be wary of entryism, right? Of other political actors hijacking their movement for their own ends. And my impression
I feel like that's
is,
what's happened. I feel like that's what's happened in America is that a certain sinister, I guess sinister is kind of a scary word, but I think a lot of sinister forces have come in and a lot of people are, I think, in too deep a little bit. So this is what I will say, Aron. So I've been doing stand-up comedy for 20 years. So I want to answer your original question about how woke is it over here. I have never in my 20 years of stand-up comedy been considered an offensive comedian. In the past 2 years, I have had people offended by my stand-up. A lot of people. So that's that. Hopefully that answers your question.
yes, it does.
And it's
So
scary because I'm not saying anything super controversial.
no, but it's interesting because I actually write a bit about this in the book. In the second part of the Tiger book, I write about the difference between an individualist country and a collectivist country. And Sweden is definitely more on the collectivist side, and you live in the most individualist country in the world. So I think what has happened over the course of almost a century in your liberal party, which was originally a liberal party, is that certain socialist ideas have come in. And as I live in a socialist country and I contrast our cultures, or at least the Anglo-Saxon culture with the Germanic Swedish culture, quite a bit in the book. I think you have imported certain concepts from European labor parties and Swedish social democratic progressive ideas that suits your country quite ill, I'd say. You have to remember that most of these policies that Sweden applied to its own population, as I said before, happened in one of the world's most homogenous places.
Yeah, and America's definitely a super diverse melting pot. I actually have a joke about that. I say that a little bit of racism in America is a good thing because that means there's a lot of different races here to hate. And it's true. It's like we're here. If everyone is just white, you know, who do you hate? Everyone just looks exactly alike. So I think
you can hate, but you don't have anyone to practice on, basically.
So I think a little bit of racism, not a lot, obviously, is a good thing because it shows that there's diversity. And so there's a pro and con to everything. And I think that's one of the pros of racism is that shows that there is diversity in your country and in your state and in your environment. And I think that's a huge positive. So I want to talk a little bit more about you winning this lawsuit against the Swedish government.
Yes,
That's
well,
kind of a big deal.
To put your worries completely to rest, I'm not a neo-Nazi. My grandparents were all Holocaust survivors, and I grew up here with my grandparents, which gave me an extra view of Sweden's role during the war, which I also thought at that point in time when I wrote the book would be important to share.
Aron, I had no thoughts that you were a neo-Nazi. I was joking.
Yes. Well, but I brought it up because the Swedish police and prosecutor
called you a neo-Nazi.
Yeah. And all they really needed to do was Google, because it says on my Wikipedia page, Jewish comedian jokes a bit about anti-Semitism from time to time. And the book
You're like,
itself
wait a minute, I'm the opposite of a neo-Nazi.
exactly. So that was quite interesting. And during the final words, what you call it when lawyers sum up at the end of the trial?
Closing arguments.
Closing arguments, yes. During the closing arguments, the prosecution showed me pictures of Adolf Hitler and Auschwitz and Anne Frank, and informed me about the Holocaust, which I frankly thought so absurd growing up the way I did. I couldn't even take offense. It was like a totally Kafkaesque situation.
I felt like they were totally making the worst argument ever.
Yes, it was a lousy argument. That's why they lost. And I think they knew they were going to lose, but they held me up for a few years in court, which from their perspective, wearing me down might be a good thing.
Okay, so that is awful. Let's talk about something that sounds super boring, but actually interesting to me, because this is my podcast, so you guys have to listen to what I want to talk about. So you're being sued, you're countersuing, and you're winning. All the while, you're innocent. You haven't done anything wrong. However, you have to pay legal fees.
No, you don't.
Oh,
this is
okay.
Sweden. This is Sweden, and I was prosecuted by the state, which means I can choose my lawyer, and then the government has to pay, at least if I win.
Okay, that's amazing. I thought they were putting you through the financial ringer as well, which was what they do in the United States.
Yeah, no, what happens is while you're being prosecuted, you can't really talk about the prosecution of yourself, publicly, which, if you're a comedian and a satirist, puts sort of a damper on your career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That must have been so hard for you. Like, you wanted to make fun of it so badly, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I look like Gandalf Grey, and I'm only 44. A very fit Gandalf Grey, I must
add. Well, we have to wrap up soon. Is your book translated in English at all? I'm so interested.
Yes, it is. It's on Amazon.
Awesome. So you guys can check out Aron Flam's book, The Swedish Tiger. This is a Swedish Tiger. Sorry, I wanted to get the wording correctly, on Amazon. How can people purchase this lithograph behind you? I'm like super interested in it.
No, that's sold out, fortunately. What part of the verdict was that they came to the conclusion that what I had done with the cover was art. So they judged me to be an artist. So now I'm an artist. I didn't even have to go to art school for this. It's amazing.
Well, Aron, I just think it's really amazing what you've done, because like you said, now there's that parody exception in Sweden. That is a huge, I mean, don't die on me, but you can die now. And like, you have that, that's like, you made it possible for comedians. That's amazing. You're like a trailblazer.
Not only that, I also will bore legal students for years to come.
You're not going to do a second edition of this lithograph? Come on.
No. You don't do a second edition of a lithograph. The printing roll that you use is destroyed after you do the printing.
Oh my
gosh. There's a limited amount of lithographs out for sale.
Wow.
And if I do more, then I'm being dishonest and opening up for another prosecution. So I think I'll abstain.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. So how many were released?
490.
Okay, wow. This is like Picasso. It might be worth like millions of dollars.
Well, I have a poster of it made, because you can make as many posters as you want, and I might bring a few to Freedom Fest. But you're not coming, are you?
I'm not coming. I'm very sad.
So I'll leave it with one of the comedians who gets to meet you.
You can leave it with Yoshi, our friend Yoshi.
Okay, cool. And do you live in LA?
I do. I live in Los Angeles.
Okay, and you know a lot of comedians there?
I do. Come visit us.
Oh, I have, and I will again.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so guys, Aron Flam, revolutionary Jewish
Thank you.
comedian, non-neo-Nazi,
Yes, definitely none.
non-neo-Nazi, anti. How can people find you on social media and follow you and support everything that you're doing and the amazing work that you've done for freedom of speech, for comedy, for history? Wow.
Well, you can follow me on Twitter, where I'm visible, hopefully, and you can follow me on YouTube. Pretty much all social media sites, actually.
Okay, awesome.
I'm a parasite on all of them.
Well, guys, if you are watching this podcast on Rockfin or YouTube, I will have Aron's social media links below in the show notes. If you're listening, I don't know what you can do. You'll just have to find him and Google him. Guys, this has been Out of the Box Podcast with Rosie Tran. As always, outoftheboxpodcast.com. I'm on Twitter at Funny Rosie and Instagram, Out of the Box Rosie. Thanks, guys.